Well, welcome everyone. We're so grateful to have you here. For those of you who I have not met, I am Dr. Melissa Cordero. I am a clinical psychologist and the manager of our ASAP program. So today we have Dr. Kate Hawley, who attended UCSB as an undergraduate and graduate student. Her doctoral research focused on the development of strength-based mental health and well-being interventions. Dr. Hawley completed her postdoctoral training at UC San Francisco's Faculty and Staff Assistance Program, where she focused on using systemic, culturally sensitive approaches to help employees thrive. Today, she'll be providing us with tools and insights on how to manage anxiety. And I'm so thankful to have Kate here with us today. And I also so grateful to have you all here because May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So we're very happy to have you join this session. And I'll turn it over to Kate.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Hi, everyone. Really great to see you all today. So glad that you made time for yourselves to attend something to support your mental health and well-being. Before we get started today, I just wanted to review some things real quick. So questions and comments are completely welcomed through the chat, and Melissa's going to be monitoring that. And then at the end, we'll have some time for me to address any questions that you have. And if we don't have time for that, or we run out of time, then I will follow up via email with questions. And we also welcome individual questions via email if you're someone who processes things at a later time and wants to ask questions later. As you know, today we're going to be diving into ways to effectively respond to anxiety symptoms as they occur. And by the end of this workshop, you should have a deeper understanding of anxiety processes in the mind and body, and how those processes and in the body and mind affect anxiety. And then you'll also learn some ways to calm the nervous system, respond more effectively to anxious thoughts, and kind of refocus on what matters most in your life instead of feeling like anxious moments are kind of running the show. And I'll be providing most of this information via PowerPoint, but there will be some moments that I'll just ask you all to slow down and we can have some experiential components of the workshop. So if you have a piece of paper handy, there's going to be one experiential moment where I'll just ask you to jot a few things down. So take a second to grab that. And then I just wanted to start by acknowledging that many of us probably feel this to be true, that anxiety is on the rise in general. And in 2024 in the United States, 43% of adults said that they felt more anxious than the previous year. So it's a real thing that we are dealing with as a collective. And a number of factors are kind of intersecting at the moment that contribute to rising anxiety rates. And we don't want to focus on addressing anxiety without acknowledging that there's real reasons a lot of people are feeling anxious or having anxious moments. And so while anxiety symptoms are very understandable and normal during difficult times today, we're still going to focus on what we ourselves can do to regulate during anxious moments so that we then have the capacity to respond more effectively to these stressors in our everyday lives and to move toward that agency and peace that we're all wanting. So before we move forward, I think let's take a moment to just settle in and slow down and give yourself some time to get comfortable, to look around, notice kind of where you are, what's happening right now in your environment. Recognize that you've arrived here. This is the only place that you need to be for the next 40 or so minutes. So maybe take a second, do some neck rolls, some shoulder rolls. Maybe take a few breaths, get into a more comfortable position. And as you're feeling more present, just acknowledge yourself for showing up today and see if you can give yourself some permission to just take in some new information, like, or maybe some familiar information, but that's really the only thing that you need to do right now. So take off any additional pressure and see if you can let yourself just take this in and take what works for you, leave what doesn't. Okay, so let's get into it. So in order to know how to effectively respond to anxiety, we first need to have a little bit of an understanding of what's happening during anxious moments. And I say anxious moments because we'll be focusing today on those moments that arise where we feel particularly activated and how to respond to those. So we won't be discussing anxiety disorders as a whole, but we'll really be honing in on those moments of dysregulation and worry that we all experience. And so anxiety is very closely related to fear. And, we all know we've all felt fear. It's a natural response to an in the moment, immediate threat. And it kind of our fight, flight, or freeze response comes online. And it happens before we can even think, so that we are activated to protect ourselves in some way and to survive. And then once the threat has passed, that fear response subsides. Anxiety, on the other hand, is different. It's based in the fear system, but it occurs in response to a real or perceived, more like nebulous, uncertain, future-oriented threat. And it's more like our reaction to the fear or to other uncomfortable emotions. And so our body and mind are trying to protect us, but often our response kind of goes into overdrive and gets stuck there. So in fear, we have the immediate response and then it subsides when the threat has gone away. And in anxiety, we find it harder to let go of that response. So we maintain this sense of stuckness. So we're going to talk about how to get out of that.
I'm stuck.
And the experience of anxiety is rooted, it's a very complex process in the body. So this is a simplification, but overall, we can think about it as two main components that are activating when we're experiencing anxious moments. And the first one occurs when the amygdala is activated, which is the part of our brain we might have all heard about that kind of perceives threat and then immediately sends messages to our nervous system to gear up for protection in whatever way we need to protect ourselves. And this is the nervous system, or responsible for the nervous system component of anxiety that we feel more in our bodies. So changes in heart rate that we feel, muscle tension, digestive issues, changes in breathing, things like that. The second component occurs in our prefrontal cortex. And this is the part of our brain that is responsible for imagination, recognizing consequences, problem solving, planning for the future, all incredibly important things, especially for being a human. And this part is responsible also for the cognitive component of anxiety that I'm sure we're all familiar with, which is those racing thoughts, trying to figure everything out, worry, concern, fear that everything will go wrong. So most of the times when we're experiencing kind of that rush of anxiety, we are in a fight, flight, or freeze response that's being activated in our bodies. And at the same time, the cognition feels like we're kind of spiraling and our thoughts are going really fast, and that's activated by the prefrontal cortex. So this is where we get stuck in those anxious moments that feel really difficult to find our way out of, because both of these processes are kind of affecting each other and intensifying. So we're going to break it down and talk about how to respond to the nervous system based processes, as well as the cognitive based symptoms of anxiety, kind of as they're occurring. And so, in addition to our fight, flight, freeze response and our ability to kind of imagine the worst case scenario, there's one more element that really keeps us stuck in anxious moments or leads them to maybe continue to occur in our life, and that is avoidance. And avoidance is a very natural response that we all have to any situation or feeling or thought that we deem unpleasant. And anxiety is arguably one of the most unpleasant feelings that we experience. So it's a very natural desire that we have to want to avoid it, to push it down, to ignore it, control it in some way. And we also often find ourselves avoiding any situations that have contributed to anxiety for us in the past. And so it seems, on the surface like a good strategy, but the difficult thing about avoidance is that it's actually only through allowing ourselves to experience the discomfort that we learn that we can tolerate it. So we learn we can cope with difficult or anxiety provoking situations. And then that reduces the anxiety that we have regarding the discomfort in the future, because we know that even if it's uncomfortable, we can tolerate it. So in avoiding our anxious feelings or thoughts or situations, or labeling them as bad, we tend to remain stuck in this cycle where we have anxiety, we avoid the feeling, thought, or situation. We don't learn we can tolerate the discomfort. And then that leads us to fear the anxiety more. So then we continue to avoid. So a lot of times when we talk about strategies for reducing anxiety, it can come from this place of wanting it to go away, like wanting to avoid it and kind of get rid of anxiety symptoms altogether. And as we move on in the workshop today, we're going to talk about it in a slightly different way that includes this paradigm shift that sounds difficult at first, but we're going to practice it. And it requires a shift in our thinking about what responding effectively to anxiety actually means. So the reality, again, is that we can cope and tolerate uncomfortable experiences, thoughts, and emotions. And that actually, in addition, resisting anxiety or coming from a place of wanting to push it down increases the threat response in our bodies because we're kind of tensing around the anxiety. So the unfortunate thing is that we cannot think or resist our way out of anxiety because those strategies are rooted in anxiety itself. The other option is that we actually invite anxiety in and kind of soften around it. We allow it to be there. We don't have to enjoy it, but we allow the experience, and then that reduces the threat response that we are experiencing just enough to be able to then access the strategies we need to soothe ourselves and to access our sense of agency. So the new goal as we continue today is to think about changing our relationship with anxiety, in that we're responding to anxious symptoms by allowing space for them and giving ourselves the opportunity to tolerate discomfort, see that we can cope with the discomfort, and then calm our nervous systems and respond in a new and more effective way to anxious thoughts. So we aren't trying to eliminate anxious feelings and thoughts altogether, because that's part of being a person navigating life. And we're not employing these strategies to control or minimize the anxiety. So instead, we're going to be focusing on giving the anxiety permission while working to better support our bodies and minds when we're having anxious moments. So before we get into the strategies, let's practice this new paradigm shift of letting anxiety in rather than trying to control it or push it away. So if you'll settle into your seat, get a little comfortable, shift, do whatever you need. And when you're ready, you can close your eyes or just put your gaze down, whatever feels comfortable for you. And then take a few deep breaths. And first, bring to mind something that brings you a moderate amount of stress or anxiety, not so much that it's keeping you up at night, just something that maybe has been a little bit on your mind lately. And as you're thinking about that, notice the feelings that come up in the body. And then try to put your energy toward fixing the feelings or making them go away. So trying to decrease the intensity of the feelings. As you're doing that, just notice how that feels. What changes occur in your body? What do you notice happens when you try to control the discomfort? Okay. Now with your eyes still closed, you can kind of like wiggle that out, take a few breaths, clear that approach. Maybe roll your neck a little bit, roll your shoulders. And now, with your eyes still closed, bring to mind that same moderate concern. Again, just take a moment to notice the sensations that arise in your body. Where are they? What do they feel like? How would you describe them? And now, in a kind voice, tell that sensation or those sensations. I'm noticing you. That's okay. You can be there. Nothing needs to change. And see how that feels. What changes, if any, occur in your body with that approach. What shifts might happen. Sit with that for a moment. Maybe take another breath in. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and just stay aware of any differences that you noticed in those approaches. You might not have. Sometimes it can be hard to give our anxiety permission to be there, especially if we haven't practiced that. So if you had some difficulty letting go, it's just a practice that evolves over time, that we practice in these small ways. If you found that you were able to invite the sensations in a little, you probably noticed that your body relaxed slightly around them. And that while still maybe not the most pleasant, there was a layer of struggle that kind of dissipated and probably led the sensations to feel a little more tolerable. So it's counterintuitive in a lot of ways that when we stop focusing on wanting the sensations to go away, they're more likely to dissipate or lessen. So this is what we mean by kind of inviting the anxiety in, giving it permission to be there. The first step in employing the strategies for addressing anxious moments will be to bring this non-judgmental awareness to anxiety symptoms as they occur, and really practicing that inviting anxiety in helps with this, because we're then less motivated to ignore our symptoms or push our symptoms down. And we can't change what we're not aware of. So in noticing our symptoms as they occur, we give ourselves an opportunity to reclaim that agency and then respond more effectively to them. So it can be helpful to ask ourselves these questions. Practice tuning into your body. Instead of immediately labeling the sensations as good or bad, just observing them. Notice where you feel them, what they feel like, how would you describe them? And you can also bring the same awareness to your thought processes. So asking yourself, what am I currently thinking? What thoughts am I noticing myself have? And then in acknowledging the feelings and thoughts, you can give yourself permission to have them without that tendency to want to control. So something helpful that you can say in those moments is, I'm experiencing some anxious feelings and thoughts right now. That's okay. I can tolerate this discomfort. There's nothing more I need to do. And then after we've acknowledged that we're even feeling anxious and we've given permission for it to be there, the second step is going to be to employ strategies to regulate the nervous system and bring it back to a state where it's sending signals to the brain that we are in fact safe. So we're not trying to control the nervous system or force ourselves into feeling better, but we're just trying to support our nervous system as it's dysregulated and giving an opportunity to regulate itself. And there's a lot of strategies for this that have to do with activating the vagus nerve, which helps regulate our heart rate, reduces stress, increases relaxation in the body, and kind of pulls us out of that fight or flight or freeze mode. And today we're going to focus on 3 strategies that you can use, and you can play around with these and see what works best for you. There's a lot of strategies out there, but these 3 strategies can be pretty helpful in the moment. So the first is slowing our breathing through intentional breathing exercises, which slows our heart rate and gears our body into that resting response. There's a lot of breathing techniques, but one that's been shown to be very effective is box breathing, which many of you might have heard of already. But that's when we inhale through the nose for 4 counts. We hold our breath at the top for 4 counts. We exhale through our mouth for 4 counts, and then we hold for 4 counts. So that can be a really effective way of just down-regulating the nervous system pretty quickly. It can take a few seconds to feel better. Another way that we can stimulate the vagus nerve is through light movement, which can help the body recognize that it is in a safe state. So this could look like getting up, walking around the office, or going outside, moving our body to, our favorite song, stretching, those sorts of light activities that don't require a ton of physical exertion from our bodies so that we're still kind of in a calm state. But we're also showing the nervous system that, because we're moving in that way, we're not under threat. And then finally, if you're feeling really overwhelmed and it's accessible to you, this is not always accessible, but it can help a lot when we're in those very heightened anxious states, is cold immersion. And so this stimulates the vagus nerve because we have cold receptors on our skin, and that triggers our nervous system's resting response. And so this can look like placing an ice pack on the back of your neck that's right near the vagus nerve, holding an ice cube, even like placing your face in a bowl of ice water if you have that accessible to you, or taking a cold shower. And so as we're engaging in these strategies, the really important thing is that we can do any of these while we're feeling anxious. And a lot of times anxiety will tell us that it's not time. Like we're not ready to slow down and breathe or do some movement or, engage in some cold immersion. But when you notice that little voice that's like, no, 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 that's not going to work, that's the time that we want to really engage in nervous system regulation strategies. So that's your little signal that that's what you might need at that moment. So let's take a brief moment to practice the box breathing technique so that we can, a lot of times intellectually, we will know the strategies, but a different shift can occur when we actually give ourselves time to experience the strategy. So go ahead, get comfortable again. Close your eyes. Let the chair support you fully. Let the chair do all the work in holding you up. Take a moment to scan your body from head to toe. See where you notice any tension, maybe in the jaw, the shoulders, stomach. And give yourself some permission to let go of the tension just a little bit more. And then I'm going to guide us through a breathing exercise. And as a reminder, when you breathe in, you'll breathe in through your nose, your stomach will inflate, we'll hold at the top. You'll exhale through your mouth, your stomach will deflate, and then we'll hold for 4 counts at the bottom. And we'll do this 2 times. All right, so ready? Breathe in through your nose. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. And out through your mouth. 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. Again, in through your nose. Hold. And out through your mouth. And hold. And before you open your eyes, notice any difference in how your body feels now versus before you took those 2 breaths. And when you do open your eyes, see if you can stay with that state. So a lot of times we'll pop out of it to the next thing. So see if you can move forward with that kind of more regulated state. Okay. So during the exercise just then, you might have noticed maybe it was really easy to calm and to not have any anxious thoughts spiraling or other thoughts about what you need to do today, things like that. But a lot of the times it's hard not to think, and that's okay. That's because that's what our brain does. So the third step in regulating our anxiety will be to respond more effectively to our anxious thoughts. And in order to do that, it can be helpful to recognize what anxious thought loops are. So when we find ourselves stuck in an anxious thought spiral, what's usually happening is that we have a wish for things to be different than they are. And the thoughts are giving us the illusion of control over an external situation that we actually don't have any control over, which is it's why the situation feels scary in the first place. But we find ourselves in this cycle where we have the illusion that if we just think about it enough, the situation will change outside of us. And in reality, nothing's changing except that we are finding ourselves more anxious. So this is a time where our prefrontal cortex is really working in overdrive and imagining all possible scenarios. And in these moments, we feel very fused with our thoughts. So it's as if there's no separation between who we are and the fact that we are thinking. We're kind of feel like we're stuck in this reality that our thoughts are creating for us. And we start to assume that everything that we're thinking is true. So this is where it's really important to remind ourselves of two truths. And the first is that even though it can be really hard to believe, thoughts are not facts. So just because we've thought something over and over again, it doesn't mean it's true. And our brains fire random thoughts all the time, all day long. When they're silly and not threatening, we can recognize them as random and we don't really believe them so much. But when our brains are offering us more scary thoughts, that sense of threat leads us to take them more seriously, even though many times they can be just as untrue as the silly ones. So it's important to recognize that a lot of times the thoughts that we find, the thinking spirals that we believe to be so true are thoughts generated by us. They're not always a reflection of the reality. And then the second truth is that we aren't our thoughts. We're the observers of our thoughts. We're the thinkers of our thoughts. And in recognizing that truth, that's where we have the space to decide how we want to interact with them. So what makes recognizing those two truths possible is what Dr. Stephen Hayes, he's a co-developer of acceptance and commitment therapy, what he calls cognitive diffusion. And when we find ourselves stuck in anxious thought spirals, again, that's when we're fused with our thoughts. So defusing from them is that process of recognizing that they are, in fact, our thoughts. And it's the process of looking at our thoughts from an observer standpoint rather than looking at the world from our thoughts or through the lens of our thoughts. So it helps us gain some perspective and distance. And there's a lot of strategies to do this, but I'll go over two that people have found particularly useful. And the first is just simply noticing without judgment that we're having the thought. So we can have a lot of thoughts in a short span of time, and it can be really helpful to just add at the beginning of the thought, once we notice we're thinking, I'm having the thought that. So an example might be, I have so much to get done today. I don't know how it's all going to happen. We would notice that that we're thinking that, and then we'd say to ourselves, I'm having the thought that I have so much to get done today, and I don't know how it's all going to happen. So even in that small little added phrase, we're gaining a little bit of distance from the thought. Another helpful technique is to name the thinking mind. So there's our observer self, where we're able to recognize when we're thinking, and then there's the thinking mind that tends to be very talkative and loud throughout the day, and especially when we're feeling anxious, it is kind of incessant. And in naming that part of the mind, we're kind of reminding ourselves that we're a little bit separate from that. So if I named my thinking mind Fred, and Fred was telling me all about his worries for the day, I would notice that. And then I'd say something to myself like, oh, yeah, there's Fred worrying again. Thanks for sharing your worries with me, Fred. No need to argue with Fred. No need to make him quiet. I'm just kind of acknowledging him without taking what he says so seriously, because I'm aware that that's his pattern. So it can feel kind of silly, but I would invite you all to try it, the next time that you have that moment of awareness of the difference between, or the distance between you and your thought. And then similar to how we kind of invited the anxious feelings in, when we try to wrestle with our thoughts, either through turning toward them and arguing with them, or through trying to suppress them or ignore them or label them as bad, we give them more power, and we increase the likelihood that they're going to contribute to our anxiety. So the goal is actually not to try to change them. It's to allow them to be there. Kind of like, you're busy, you have somewhere you really need to go. You're walking on a busy street, maybe in a city. If you stopped and turned and engaged with every single person coming at you, you wouldn't be able to get to where you want to go, to what's most important to you. You also wouldn't get there by turning around and running away from each person that you see coming. So instead, you're moving toward, what's meaningful in your life. You're seeing the thoughts pass by, just as people on a street. You're aware of them, but you're not turning and engaging in some way with each thought that passes by. And usually what that will lead to is just more clarity, that the things that are really important, that we actually really need to plan for, will arise. We can trust that we'll have, the important thoughts that will help us in our planning for the future and all of that. We don't need to look at every single anxious thought that comes by. So this is kind of akin to booting the anxiety out of the driver's seat, stepping back into the driver's seat, letting the anxiety be in the car with us, but continuing to move toward what we want in life. So in putting all this together, in reclaiming our peace and agency, and this is an overview. It takes practicing these different strategies a good amount and being patient with ourselves as we do it. But this is an outline that you can follow when you're experiencing anxious moments. And we'll send a PDF to everyone after, so that you don't have to feel like you have to jot all this down. But the first step is really going to be to bring the non-judgmental awareness to your anxious thoughts and feelings, just recognizing that they're there. And then the second step is inviting the experience in. You're not saying, yay, this is so wonderful. You don't have to love it, but in allowing it to be there and in letting go of some of that urge to control it, it actually helps to lessen the suffering of the moment. And then third is engaging in strategies to regulate the nervous system, to support the nervous system. So you're on your same side, your own side with this. Some strategies we talked about are the box breathing, the gentle movement, the cold immersion. And then once our nervous system is regulated just a little bit, we can then practice the diffusion from anxious thoughts. So again, we're not trying to change them, but we're just seeing that we have some space between us and them. And we can do this through that technique of I'm having the thought that XYZ, or naming the thinking mind. I would really encourage you all to try this, throughout the day and just see how it feels, because it, again, kind of sounds silly, but it can be quite helpful. And then the last step is in finding our agency again. So asking ourselves, what do I actually have control over right now? My anxiety is making me think so hard about all these things I don't have control over. In this instance, what can I do for myself? And it helps us recognize that we can take action toward our goals while still feeling anxious or having anxious thoughts. And that anxiety doesn't have to, stand in the way of what we need or want. So we can tolerate the discomfort and trust ourselves to cope with it, and then continue to move toward what's best for us. And usually that doesn't happen by waiting for anxiety to subside completely. It's just how do we work with it? All right, so I will stop there, and I'm going to stop the recording, and then or I guess Melissa, maybe you can stop the